In the darkest corners of galactic cantinas, when the alcohol flows freely and inhibitions fade, old spacers whisper tales that make even hardened veterans shiver. They speak of a ghost species, a myth wrapped in stardust and legend. The humans, they call them, beings of such terrifying adaptability and relentless determination that entire civilizations would rather believe them extinct than face the truth of their existence. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council has maintained perfect order across 10,000 worlds. The Zephyrians control trade with their mathematical precision. The Korthak hegemony enforces peace through overwhelming military might. The Crystalline Veiltar commune through pure thought, managing diplomacy with emotionless efficiency. Each species has found their place in the cosmic hierarchy, content in the knowledge that the universe follows predictable patterns. But patterns can break. Order can shatter. And sometimes the myths we dismiss as children's stories turn out to be the most dangerous truths of all. Tonight, as an armada of unknown ships materializes at the edge of Council space, bearing technology that defies known physics and crewed by beings thought lost to time, the galaxy is about to learn a hard lesson. Never dismiss a legend until you're absolutely certain it's truly dead. The humans have returned, and they're not happy about being forgotten. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with unprecedented urgency. In the vast crystalline amphitheater that orbited the neutral moon of Kepler, 442c, representatives from across the galaxy gathered with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright panic. The chamber's bioluminescent walls pulsed with an anxious rhythm, responding to the collective emotional state of the assembled delegates. High Counselor Vex Thara of the Zephyrian Trade Federation adjusted her flowing robes with mechanical precision, her forearms working in perfect synchronization as she accessed multiple data streams simultaneously. Her species had built their reputation on calculated decisions and mathematical certainty, but the readings flooding her neural implants defied every computational model she possessed. The numbers simply didn't add up. "The sensor readings are impossible," she announced, her voice carrying the metallic undertone common to her people. 17,000 vessels appearing simultaneously across a 12-light-year perimeter. No hyperspace signatures, no quantum tunneling residue, no temporal displacement markers. They simply appeared as if reality itself decided to manufacture a fleet from nothing. General Krogar of the Korthak hegemony slammed his massive fist against the podium, causing several smaller delegates to jump. His species stood nearly 3 meters tall, with chitinous armor that had evolved over millennia of warfare. The Korthak had conquered half the galaxy through superior firepower and tactical brilliance, but even their most advanced scouts couldn't explain what they were witnessing. "Impossible or not, they're there," Krogar growled, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "My battle fleets are already moving to intercept. Whatever these unknowns are planning, they'll find the Korthak military ready for them. We've never met a species that could stand against our dreadnoughts." A wave of crystalline laughter filled the chamber, though it carried no warmth or humor. The Veiltar Communion spoke through their primary representative, a being of living crystal whose thoughts resonated directly into the minds of others. Unlike the emotional species around them, the Veiltar processed information through pure logic, making their current state of confusion particularly unsettling. "Your confidence is admirable but misguided, General Krogar. We have attempted to establish mental contact with these vessels. The results are disturbing. There is something familiar about their thought patterns, yet impossibly ancient. We sense intelligence, yes, but it carries echoes of species long extinct." The chamber fell silent except for the nervous chittering of the insect-like scree delegates and the low humming of the energy-based Lux-Eye representatives. Ambassador Thylin of the Altarian Collective, her pale blue skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns of stress, finally broke the quiet with a question that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "Has anyone considered that these might be the humans?" Some delegates erupted in nervous laughter, others hissed in disbelief, and a few simply stared in stunned silence. The Altarians were known for their extensive historical archives, but even mentioning the humans in a serious context seemed absurd to most present. High Counselor Vexthara's processing nodes whirred as she accessed historical databases. The humans have been extinct for over 3 millennia. The records are quite clear on this matter. Their homeworld was destroyed in the Great Cleansing, their colonies scattered or absorbed into other species. They exist now only in children's stories and historical footnotes. Do they? Ambassador Thylan's patterns shifted to deep purple, indicating extreme concern. Our archives contain more detailed records than most species maintain. The humans weren't merely another spacefaring race. They were something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that refused to accept limitations, that adapted to every environment, that treated impossible challenges as minor inconveniences. She activated a holographic display that showed various star charts and historical timelines. Look at the expansion patterns. In less than 5 centuries, they went from a single world to colonies in 17 different galaxies. They didn't just terraform planets, they transformed themselves to survive in conditions that would kill any other known species. Aquatic worlds, high radiation systems, planets with crushing gravity or toxic atmospheres. Wherever they went, they thrived. General Krogar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Ancient history. Extinct species, no matter how adaptable, don't spontaneously return from oblivion to threaten the established order. My strategic analysis indicates these are likely refugees from the void spiral conflicts, perhaps using salvage technology to appear more numerous than they actually are. General, we must inform you that our telepathic scans have detected thought patterns consistent with human neural architecture. The mathematical probability of this being coincidental is approximately 0.0001%. Explain, Vexthara commanded, her multiple arms now moving rapidly as she processed this new information. Human consciousness operated differently from any other known species, where most intelligences follow predictable patterns of logic, emotion, or instinct. Humans displayed what they called adaptive cognition. They could fundamentally alter their thinking processes to match whatever situation they faced. A human could think like a mathematician when solving equations, like an artist when creating beauty, like a warrior when facing combat, or like a philosopher when contemplating existence. All within the same individual. Dead ad speculative. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates tried to process this information. The concept of consciousness that could reshape itself at will was disturbing to species that had evolved along more specialized paths. Ambassador Thylan continued her presentation, her patterns now cycling through rapid color changes that indicated she was accessing her deepest memory banks. There's something else. The humans had a concept they called holding grudges. They would plan revenge not just for themselves, but for their children, their children's children, entire bloodlines dedicated to settling scores that others would have forgotten within decades. You're suggesting, High Counselor Vexthara said slowly, that a supposedly extinct species has spent 3,000 years planning some form of retaliation against the galaxy that destroyed them. I'm suggesting that if these are indeed humans, we may have severely underestimated what extinction means to a species that has never accepted any other form of defeat. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's emergency alert system activated with a sound that made every delegate freeze. The massive display screen that dominated the front of the chamber lit up with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Dozens of star systems were reporting the same phenomenon. Massive fleets materializing without warning, taking defensive positions around inhabited worlds but making no aggressive moves. General Krogar accessed his military networks, his expression growing increasingly grim as reports flooded in. This isn't possible. My commanders are reporting that these unknown vessels are using technology that our scientists claim can't exist. Ships that phase in and out of normal space, weapons that seem to manipulate fundamental forces, defensive systems that adapt in real time to whatever we fire at them. Adaptive technology, Ambassador Thylan whispered, her patterns now pure white with terror. Just like adaptive consciousness. They don't just build tools, they create systems that learn and evolve. The Vailtar representative suddenly began pulsing with alarm frequencies that hurt to witness. We are receiving a transmission. All vessels are broadcasting the same message simultaneously across all known communication channels. The chamber fell completely silent as the message began to play. The voice that filled the space was unmistakably alien, yet carried undertones that seemed familiar to several species present. It spoke in perfect galactic standard with nuances and inflections that suggested the speaker understood not just the words but the cultural context behind every phrase. To the beings who call themselves the Galactic Council, greetings. We are the descendants of those you believed you had erased from existence. We are the children of worlds you thought you had silenced forever. We are human, and we have not forgotten. The voice paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembled delegates like a suffocating blanket. For 3,000 years we have watched from the shadows as you built your perfect order on the ashes of our worlds. We have observed your peace, your prosperity, your certainty that you had solved the problem of chaos in the galaxy. We have learned much during our exile. General Krogar tried to access his fleet communications, but found all military channels jammed with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Korthak systems. We have not returned for conquest. We have not come to destroy your civilizations or claim your worlds. We have returned because the galaxy faces a threat that your perfect order cannot comprehend, let alone defeat. The enemies approaching from beyond the galactic rim will not be stopped by your mathematics, your weapons, or your logic. They require something you have forgotten how to access. The voice grew colder, more determined. They require humanity, and whether you accept us as allies or attempt to destroy us again, we will do what we have always done. We will adapt. We will survive. And we will protect this galaxy because despite everything you have done to us, we still consider it home. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. For long moments, no one moved or spoke. Finally, High Counselor Vextata managed to find her voice. What enemies from beyond the rim? Her question was answered not by words, but by the chamber's long-range sensors suddenly detecting massive gravitational anomalies at the galaxy's edge. Something was coming through the void between galaxies, something so vast that it was already affecting local space-time simply by approaching. Ambassador Thylin looked around the chamber at the faces of delegates who had spent their entire lives believing in the security and permanence of their galactic civilization. I think, she said quietly, we're about to find out why the humans really came back. The emergency session continued for hours, but the discussion had fundamentally changed. Instead of debating how to respond to the mysterious human fleet, the council found itself grappling with a more terrifying question. If a species as adaptable and resourceful as humanity had spent 3 millennia preparing for something, what could possibly be coming that would require their intervention? Outside the crystal chambers, in the cold vacuum of space, 17,000 human vessels maintained their positions with mechanical patience. Inside those ships, descendants of Earth's children who had survived genocide and exile prepared for a war that would determine not just their own fate, but the survival of every living being in the galaxy. The humans had returned, and they had brought with them the promise that nothing would ever be the same again. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the UES Resilience, watching the crystalline structure of the Galactic Council chambers through the massive viewport. Her reflection stared back at her, showing features that bore the marks of genetic adaptation accumulated over 3 millennia of survival in hostile environments. Her eyes carried flecks of silver, a modification that allowed her to see across multiple spectrums of light. Her skin had a subtle blue undertone, the result of generations living in low-oxygen environments. She was human, but she was also something more, something evolved. "Captain," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Commander Marcus Chen, her tactical officer, approaching with a data pad clutched in his cybernetically enhanced hand. Like most humans of their generation, Marcus bore visible signs of the technological integration that had allowed their species to survive where others would have perished. Neural interfaces gleamed at his temples, and his left arm had been replaced entirely with a biomechanical construct that could interface directly with ship systems. The Council is requesting direct communication, ma'am. They want to speak with our leadership before they'll consider any form of cooperation. B. Elena smiled, an expression that would have seemed predatory to the aliens currently debating humanity's fate. 3,000 years of exile had taught her people many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was patience. They had learned to think not in terms of months or years, but in centuries and millennia. Of course they do. They need to understand what they're dealing with before they can figure out how to control it. She gestured toward the council chambers. Set up a secure channel. Full diplomatic protocols, but make sure they understand we're not supplicants coming to beg for recognition. Already handled, Captain. Admiral Sarah Mitchell is standing by on the Prometheus to handle the formal contact. She wanted me to remind you that we're operating under Lazarus protocols now. No revealing our full capabilities until we know their intentions. The Lazarus protocols had been developed during the early years of exile, a comprehensive strategy for eventual recontact with galactic civilization. The protocols assumed that humanity would be viewed with suspicion and hostility and planned accordingly. Every human ship, every weapon system, every piece of technology had been designed with multiple layers of capability that could be revealed gradually as the situation demanded. "What's the status on the perimeter scouts?" she asked, walking toward the bridge. "Concerning. Long-range sensors are picking up massive gravitational distortions at the galactic rim. Whatever's coming through, it's big enough to affect local space-time from several light-years away. The AI analysis suggests we're looking at structures the size of small moons, possibly larger." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. During their exile, humanity had encountered things in the deep void that defied conventional understanding of physics and biology. The Devourers, as they had come to call them, were entities that consumed entire star systems not for resources, but for reasons that seemed incomprehensible to any form of intelligence that originated from normal space-time. "Have we confirmed the species classification?" "Preliminary analysis matches the profiles from the Kepler incident. We're looking at a full-scale Devourer incursion, possibly their largest mobilization on record." The bridge of the Resilience buzzed with activity as they arrived. Unlike the sterile, automated bridges common to most galactic species, human ships maintained a deliberate balance between technological efficiency and organic adaptability. Crew members worked at stations that could be rapidly reconfigured for different scenarios, while AI systems provided support rather than replacement for human decision-making.
"Communications, patch me through to Admiral Mitchell," Elena ordered.
The main screen activated, showing a woman who appeared to be in her 50s, but whose eyes carried the weight of someone far older. Admiral Sarah Mitchell had been born in the generation immediately following the Great Cleansing, raised on stories of Earth and trained from childhood for the day when humanity would return to galactic affairs. She commanded the largest human battle group from her flagship, the UES Prometheus, a vessel that incorporated technology developed over 3 millennia of desperate innovation. "Captain Vasquez, I trust you've been enjoying the view of our old friends." "It's been enlightening, Admiral. Are we ready for formal contact?" "As ready as we can be. I've reviewed the Council's current composition and political structure. Fascinating how little they've changed in 3,000 years. Still the same species holding the same positions, still convinced that their way of organizing the galaxy is the only logical approach." Elena could see multiple displays in the background of Mitchell's transmission showing tactical analyses of every major fleet in Council space. Human intelligence networks had been gathering information for centuries, preparing for this moment, direct and honest, with strategic omissions. "We tell them about the Devourer threat, offer our assistance, but we don't reveal the extent of our capabilities until we see how they respond. If they try to marginalize us or treat us as junior partners, we escalate to more persuasive demonstrations." The communication channel expanded to include the council chambers. Elena watched as the various alien delegates arranged themselves in their traditional hierarchy, with the most powerful species occupying the central positions, while smaller civilizations clustered around the periphery. It was a system that had worked for millennia, but it was also a system that had no place for a species that refused to accept predetermined roles. Admiral Mitchell's image appeared on the Council's main display, and Elena could see the immediate reactions of the various delegates. Some appeared curious, others hostile, and a few seemed genuinely terrified. The Altarian representative, Ambassador Thylon, leaned forward with obvious interest, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that Elena recognized as intense curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Honorable members of the Galactic Council," Admiral Mitchell began, her voice carrying the formal tones of diplomatic protocol while maintaining an underlying edge that suggested she was not particularly impressed by the gathering.
I am Admiral Sarah Mitchell of the United Earth Fleet.
I speak for the human survivors and their descendants who have spent the past 3 millennia adapting to life beyond the borders of your civilization. High Counselor Vexthara responded with mechanical precision, her multiple arms working to access various data streams as she spoke. "Admiral Mitchell, the Council acknowledges your presence, though we must express significant skepticism regarding your claims. Our records indicate that the human species was rendered extinct during the Consolidation Wars 3,000 years ago." "Your records are incomplete," Mitchell replied without hesitation, "as are your understanding of what extinction means to a species that has never accepted the concept of impossible odds. We survived because survival is what humans do. We adapted because adaptation is our fundamental nature, and we learned because learning from our enemies is how we ensure we don't repeat our mistakes." General Krogar of the Kortak hegemony leaned forward aggressively, his massive form dominating his section of the chamber. "You speak of enemies, human. Are we to understand that you consider the Council hostile?" Elena watched Admiral Mitchell's expression carefully. This was the critical moment where diplomatic contact could either establish a foundation for cooperation or escalate into the kind of confrontation that humanity had been preparing for since their exile began. "General Krogar, I consider the Council to be exactly what you have always been, a collection of species so convinced of your own superiority that you cannot recognize genuine threats until they are destroying you. 3,000 years ago, you saw humanity as a problem to be solved through violence. Today, you face a problem that violence alone cannot solve, and you will need to decide whether your pride is worth more than your survival." The chamber erupted in angry responses from multiple delegates, but Mitchell continued speaking, her voice rising above the chaos. "At this moment, devourer entities are entering our galaxy from the void beyond the rim. These are not beings you can negotiate with, intimidate, or defeat through conventional means. They exist to consume the fundamental forces that make life possible, and they will not stop until every star in this galaxy has been reduced to cold matter drifting in empty space. Devourers? We have no records of such entities. You have no records because every previous civilization that encountered them was completely erased, not just destroyed. Erased. Their histories, their cultures, their very genetic patterns removed from existence as if they had never been. The only reason we know about them is because humans encountered them during our exile and managed to survive the experience." Admiral Mitchell activated a holographic display that showed sensor readings and tactical analyses that made several delegates gasp in shock. The data revealed encounters with entities that defied known physics, battles fought in dimensions that normal matter couldn't access, and defensive strategies that required the kind of radical adaptation that only humanity had mastered. "We have fought them before. We have studied them, learned their patterns, developed countermeasures. We have sacrificed entire fleets to gain intelligence about their capabilities and weaknesses. And we have discovered that defeating them requires something your perfect galactic order has systematically eliminated: unpredictability." Elena could see the impact of Mitchell's words on the assembled delegates. Species that had built their civilizations on logical patterns and predictable behaviors were struggling to comprehend an enemy that existed outside those frameworks. High Counselor Vexthara processed this information with visible difficulty, her computational systems struggling to integrate data that contradicted fundamental assumptions about reality. You are claiming that these devourers can only be defeated by abandoning logical military doctrine? I'm claiming that they can only be defeated by a species that refuses to accept defeat as a logical outcome. Every other civilization approaches warfare as a problem to be solved through superior resources, better tactics, or more advanced technology. Humans approach warfare as an existential challenge that requires us to become something more than we were before the fight began. Ambassador Thylan's patterns shifted to deep blue, indicating intense concentration as she accessed her historical databases. Admiral, our archives contain references to something called the human factor in pre-cleansing military assessments. The report suggested that human forces consistently achieved victories that mathematical analysis indicated should have been impossible. The human factor, Mitchell said with a slight smile, is what happens when a species refuses to accept mathematical limitations on what they can accomplish. It's why your ancestors were so eager to eliminate us. We made your perfect calculations meaningless. General Krogar's mandibles clicked with irritation, even assuming your claims about these devourers are accurate. What makes you believe the Council needs human assistance? The combined military might of the galaxy has never failed to protect our territories. Because, Admiral Mitchell replied, her tone becoming deadly serious, the combined military might of 17 previous galaxies also thought they could protect their territories. The Devourers are currently using those galaxies as raw material for their assault on ours. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. The idea that entities existed capable of consuming entire galaxies was beyond the comprehension of species that measured threats in terms of planets or star systems. Elena watched the faces of the delegates and realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic politics. They had managed to terrify every species in the Council simultaneously. What do you want? High Counselor Vexthera finally asked, her voice carrying none of its previous mechanical confidence. We want to save this galaxy, Admiral Mitchell replied. All of it. Every species, every world, every form of life that calls this place home. Because despite everything you did to us, despite 3,000 years of exile and persecution, we still considered this our home too. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. But we will do this with or without your cooperation. The question you need to answer is whether you want to be our allies in this fight or whether you want to spend the final days of galactic civilization debating whether we have the right to save you. The Emergency War Council convened 12 hours after Admiral Mitchell's address, bringing together military commanders from across the galaxy in a secure facility deep within the asteroid belt of the Kepler system. The chamber had been hastily constructed using both Council and human technology, creating a space that felt alien to everyone present. Council representatives found the human adaptive lighting systems uncomfortable, while humans struggled with the rigid geometric patterns that dominated Council architecture. General Krogar arrived with a full escort of Korthak battlecruisers, their massive forms bristling with weapons that had conquered hundreds of worlds. Admiral Mitchell matched his show of force with a single human vessel, the UES Prometheus, which appeared deceptively modest beside the Korthak dreadnoughts. The visual comparison was deliberate, Elena realized as she observed from the resilience. Humans had learned long ago that appearing less threatening often provided tactical advantages. The sensor readings are confirmed, announced Dr. Keltar of the Vailtar Scientific Communion, her crystalline form pulsing with frequencies that indicated extreme distress. The gravitational anomalies at the galactic rim are consistent with massive structures moving through hyperspace. Conservative estimates suggest we are facing a minimum of 50,000 individual entities, each one larger than our biggest space stations. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the galaxy's edge, where normal space seemed to be warping under the influence of approaching forces. Red indicators marked dozens of points where reality itself appeared to be breaking down, creating rifts that allowed impossible geometries to exist alongside normal three-dimensional space. High Admiral Zixandra of the Aquatic Coalition studied the data with her species' characteristic attention to detail. The aquatic worlds had survived for millennia by understanding fluid dynamics and flow patterns, making them excellent at predicting movement through space. Her analysis was therefore particularly disturbing. These entities are not following conventional physics. Their approach vectors suggest they are moving through dimensions we cannot access, using our galaxy's gravitational field as an anchor point. They are essentially falling into our reality from somewhere else entirely. Admiral Mitchell stood at her position with the kind of relaxed alertness that Elena recognized from years of combat operations. While the Council representatives struggled to comprehend the implications of the sensor data, Mitchell displayed the calm confidence of someone who had faced these enemies before and survived. Dr. Keltar, High Admiral Zixandra, your analyses are accurate but incomplete. The entities approaching our galaxy are not using conventional faster-than-light travel because they exist primarily in what humans have termed concept space, a layer of reality where ideas and mathematical relationships have physical substance. You expect us to believe that these devourers are made of mathematics? I expect you to understand that your current framework for comprehending reality is inadequate for the threat we face, Mitchell replied without hesitation. The devourers exist as living embodiments of entropy, consumption, and dissolution. They don't destroy matter and energy in the way your weapons do. They unweave the fundamental patterns that allow matter and energy to exist in the first place. She activated a personal holographic projector that displayed three-dimensional models of previous devourer encounters. The images showed battles that seemed to defy basic principles of physics, with human ships maneuvering through space that folded in on itself while engaging enemies that shifted between solid matter and pure concept. This footage was recorded during the Kepler incident 237 years ago. A human colony fleet encountered a devourer scout formation in the void between galaxies. Watch carefully. The display showed human vessels that looked nothing like current Council ship designs. They moved with organic fluidity, their hulls shifting and adapting in real time to environmental conditions. When they engaged the devourers, the battle unfolded in ways that made several Council representatives physically uncomfortable to watch. Elena observed as devourer entities phased in and out of visible reality, attacking human ships with weapons that seemed to erase sections of space-time rather than simply destroying matter. Human vessels responded with tactics that looked insane by conventional military standards, deliberately flying into impossible spatial configurations and using the resulting distortions as both defense and offense. "How did they survive?" whispered Ambassador Thylin, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that indicated complete bewilderment. "By refusing to accept the logic that said survival was impossible," Admiral Mitchell answered. "Human ships are designed with adaptive hull configurations that can exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Our weapons don't just fire projectiles, they fire mathematical concepts that can redefine local physics. Our crews are trained to think in ways that normal reality considers paradoxical." Dr. Keltar pulsed with alarm frequencies. "You are describing technology that violates fundamental laws of physics. Such capabilities should be impossible to develop or maintain." "They are impossible," Mitchell agreed. "For species that approach technology development through purely logical frameworks, humans develop these capabilities through what we call desperate innovation, the process of solving impossible problems by refusing to acknowledge that they cannot be solved." The holographic display shifted to show the aftermath of the Kepler incident. Human ships that had been damaged in the battle were rebuilding themselves using materials that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal space. Crews were working in environments that physics textbooks would classify as lethal, protected by equipment that seemed to bend reality around the wearer. General Krogar stood abruptly, his massive form radiating the kind of aggression that had made the Korthak hegemony the galaxy's dominant military power. "Even accepting your claims about these adaptive technologies, the combined fleets of the Council represent over 2 million vessels. Surely numerical superiority provides some advantage." "General, numerical superiority is meaningless against an enemy that exists partially outside the mathematics that govern normal spacetime. Every devourer entity you destroy in conventional space continues to exist in concept space. They can reconstitute themselves indefinitely unless you attack them in dimensions that your current technology cannot access." Admiral Mitchell gestured toward the display, which now showed tactical analyses of 17 previous galactic conflicts with Devourer forces. Initial confidence from the defending civilization, massive casualties as conventional weapons proved ineffective, desperate attempts at evacuation as entire star systems were consumed, and finally complete silence as the last Defender installations were reduced to fundamental particles. The Andromeda incident 4,000 years ago, the Triangulum campaign 6,000 years ago, the Magellanic Wars 8,000 years ago, 17 galaxies general, trillions of beings across hundreds of different species, all with the same confidence you just expressed, all reduced to raw materials for the next Devourer assault. What? High Admiral Zixandra studied the tactical data with growing alarm. Admiral Mitchell, these battle records suggest that the Devourers learn from each encounter. Their tactics evolve based on the resistance they face. Correct. They analyze every defensive strategy, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine employed against them. Then they develop countermeasures that make those approaches not just ineffective but actively helpful to their objectives. Conventional military thinking becomes a liability because they can predict and neutralize any logical response. Elena watched the faces of the council representatives as the implications became clear. Species that had spent millennia perfecting their military doctrines were discovering that their greatest strengths would become fatal weaknesses against an enemy that fed on predictability. What makes humans different? Dr. Keltar asked, her crystalline form dim with what Elena recognized as despair. If these entities can counter any logical military response, how have you managed to survive multiple encounters? Admiral Mitchell smiled, and Elena could see that it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had looked into the abyss and discovered that they could stare back hard enough to make the abyss blink first. Because humans are not logical. We are adaptable, creative, stubborn, and fundamentally irrational. When faced with impossible odds, we don't calculate the probability of failure. We ask ourselves what it would take to win, then we become whatever we need to be to achieve that goal. She activated another display showing human fleet compositions and battle tactics. Unlike the rigid formations favored by Council militaries, human forces appeared to operate in constantly shifting patterns that seemed chaotic until Elena realized they were actually fractals, mathematical structures that maintained coherence across multiple scales of organization. Our ships don't follow predetermined tactical doctrines because predetermine anything is what the Devourers expect. Every human captain is trained to think like an artist, a mathematician, a philosopher, and a warrior simultaneously. Our battle plans are created through creative processes that deliberately incorporate elements of randomness, intuition, and what other species would consider madness. General Krogar leaned forward, his tactical mind struggling to process these concepts. You are describing a military force with no standardized procedures, no predictable command structure, no reliable tactical frameworks. Such a force should collapse into chaos within days of any significant engagement. It should, Admiral Mitchell agreed. But it doesn't, because chaos is just another tool in our arsenal. Humans have learned to use disorder as a weapon, to employ confusion as a defensive strategy, and to turn our own unpredictability into a tactical advantage that the Devourers cannot counter. The chamber fell silent as the assembled military leaders tried to comprehend a form of warfare that violated everything they had been trained to believe about effective combat operations. Elena could see that some were beginning to understand why the ancient Galactic Council had been so eager to eliminate humanity. A species that could weaponize chaos itself represented a fundamental challenge to any civilization built on order and predictability. Ambassador Thylan finally broke the silence with a question that carried implications no one wanted to consider. Admiral Mitchell, if humans are so uniquely qualified to fight these Devourers, why did you wait 3,000 years to return? Why didn't you warn us about this threat earlier? Admiral Mitchell's expression became grave as she considered her response. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of centuries of bitter experience. Because, Ambassador, we tried to warn the galaxy once before. The response was the Great Cleansing. Your ancestors decided that a species capable of fighting beings like the Devourers was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They chose to eliminate us rather than accept that some threats require unconventional solutions. She gestured toward the display showing the approaching Devourer forces. Now those threats have found you anyway, and you will discover that the galaxy you built on the ashes of our worlds is defenseless against enemies that exist beyond the reach of your perfect order. The question you must answer is whether you want our help or whether you prefer to face extinction rather than admit you were wrong about humanity. The War Council continued for hours, but Elena could see that the fundamental dynamic had already shifted. The Council was no longer debating whether to accept human assistance. They were beginning to realize that without it, their civilization had perhaps days or weeks left to exist. The first Devourer probe arrived at the Helios Nebula 3 days ahead of schedule, emerging from concept space with a distortion that made nearby stars flicker like candle flames in a hurricane. The combined fleet positioning itself to intercept stretched across several light hours, representing the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Council forces had arranged themselves in traditional battle formations, while human vessels scattered seemingly at random throughout the operational area. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Resilience, watching sensor readings that defied conventional interpretation. The approaching entity registered as simultaneously solid and incorporeal, massive and microscopic, singular and multiple. Her crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire lives, but she could see the tension in their movements as they prepared to engage an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality. "Captain, we're receiving the final tactical briefing from Admiral Mitchell," reported Commander Chen, his cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's communication systems. "All human vessels are to operate under Paradox Protocol Omega. Council forces are requesting coordination with our fleet movements." Elena smiled grimly. The Council still didn't understand that coordination was exactly what the Devourers expected. Traditional military thinking emphasized unity of command and coordinated assault patterns, creating the kind of predictable behavior that made civilizations easy to consume. "Inform Admiral Mitchell that Resilience is ready for autonomous operation. Tell the Council forces that we'll support their efforts, but they need to understand that our support will look like chaos from their perspective." The main display showed the approaching Devourer probe, a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Parts of it appeared solid and metallic, while other sections flickered between states of matter that physics textbooks claimed were mutually exclusive. Most disturbing were the areas that seemed to exist as pure mathematics made manifest. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "All stations report ready, Captain," announced Lieutenant Torres from her position at the tactical console. Her enhanced nervous system allowed her to process information at superhuman speeds, but even she seemed uncomfortable with the sensor readings. "The entity is approximately 50 kilometers in diameter, but mass readings are inconsistent with its apparent volume." Inconsistent how? Sometimes it registers as having the mass of a small moon. Other times, our sensors indicate negative mass. Occasionally, it appears to have no mass at all, existing as pure information density. Elena nodded. This matched reports from previous Devourer encounters. The entities existed across multiple layers of reality, making them nearly impossible to target using conventional weapons. Destroying their physical manifestation was meaningless if their conceptual existence remained intact. Engineering? Status on the reality anchor systems? "All systems green, Captain," came the reply from Chief Engineer Martinez. "The quantum flux generators are maintaining stable paradox fields around the ship. We're ready to phase into combat configuration on your command." The reality anchor systems represented one of humanity's most crucial innovations for fighting Devourers. By creating localized zones where contradictory physical laws could coexist, human ships could operate in the same conceptual space as their enemies. The technology was dangerous, requiring crew members to think in ways that normal consciousness found deeply disturbing, but it was the only way to engage Devourers on equal terms. Captain, Admiral Mitchell is initiating first contact protocols with the entity, Commander Chen reported. Elena watched as the human flagship UES Prometheus moved toward the Devourer probe with a trajectory that appeared suicidal by conventional military standards. The ship was flying directly into the entity's influence zone, where normal physics began to break down and reality became negotiable. Admiral Mitchell to all vessels, came the transmission across all channels. Remember that this is not just a battle. This is a conversation conducted through applied violence. The entity will attempt to understand us through our combat patterns, show it something it cannot comprehend. The Council forces opened fire first, unleashing a coordinated barrage that represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology. Energy beams that could vaporize asteroids, kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, and exotic weapons that manipulated fundamental forces struck the Devourer probe simultaneously. The effect was spectacular and completely ineffective. The entity absorbed the energy attacks, converted the kinetic weapons into raw materials for its own structure, and seemed to grow stronger as it analyzed the exotic weapon frequencies. Within seconds, it had developed countermeasures that turned the Council's advanced weapons into feeding mechanisms. "This is General Krogar to all Council forces," came the transmission from the Korthak command vessel. "Primary assault, ineffective. Implementing secondary attack patterns." Elena watched the Council fleets reorganize themselves into different tactical formations, preparing to launch another coordinated assault with different weapon configurations. It was exactly what the Devourer expected, the kind of logical military response that had doomed 17 previous galaxies. "Now," she commanded. The Resilience activated its reality anchor systems and phased into combat configuration. Ilian felt the disorienting sensation of her consciousness expanding to exist across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The ship around her became fluid, its hull reconfiguring itself into shapes that maintained structural integrity through mathematical relationships rather than physical materials. Human vessels throughout the fleet underwent similar transformations, becoming something that existed between conventional matter and pure concept. They began engaging the Devourer probe using tactics that violated everything the Council forces believed about effective combat. Instead of coordinated attacks, human ships struck randomly, each vessel operating according to combat algorithms that incorporated elements of jazz improvisation, chaos mathematics, and abstract art. Some vessels attacked the probe's physical manifestation, while others targeted its conceptual existence using weapons that fired pure ideas rather than energy or matter. The UES Prometheus dove directly into the entity's core, its hull phasing in and out of normal space as it navigated through sections of the probe that existed as living geometry. Admiral Mitchell's voice came across the tactical channels, calm and focused despite operating in an environment that would have driven most beings insane. "All vessels, the entity is attempting to establish pattern recognition on our behavior. Initiate cognitive disruption protocols. Make it impossible for this thing to understand what we are." Elena activated the Resilience's most exotic weapon system, a device that fired concentrated paradoxes capable of creating localized logic failures in target systems. The weapon existed because human engineers had refused to accept that contradictory concepts couldn't be weaponized, developing technology that made reality temporarily forget how to be consistent. The paradox torpedo struck a section of the Devourer probe that appeared to be made of crystallized mathematics, causing a cascade failure that spread throughout the entity's structure. For several seconds, parts of the probe forgot that they existed, creating gaps in reality that other human vessels exploited with attacks that targeted the entity's information density rather than its physical form. "Captain, we're receiving data streams from the probe," reported Lieutenant Torres, her voice tight with concentration. "It's trying to analyze our tactics, but the analysis systems keep crashing. Our combat patterns are creating logical contradictions that its processing systems cannot resolve." Elena could see the effect on the tactical display. The Devourer probe was flickering between multiple configurations, its structure becoming unstable as it attempted to adapt to opponents that refused to behave according to comprehensible patterns. Parts of it began dissolving as its mathematical foundations developed errors that propagated throughout its entire existence.
All human vessels. The entity is entering critical instability,
Admiral Mitchell announced. Prepare for final phase termination. Remember, we're not just destroying this thing. We're teaching it that our galaxy contains beings it cannot understand or consume. The climax of the battle occurred when human vessels throughout the fleet synchronized their reality anchor systems, creating a zone of conceptual space where the laws of physics became subject to democratic vote. Within this zone, the Devourer probe found itself existing in an environment where its fundamental nature was constantly being redefined by opponents who treated reality as a collaborative creative project rather than a fixed set of rules. The entity's destruction was unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed. Instead of exploding or dissolving, it simply stopped making sense. Its structure collapsed not because of physical damage, but because it could no longer maintain coherent existence in a reality that refused to follow predictable patterns. In the aftermath, the combined fleet found itself floating in normal space that had been temporarily redefined by human intervention. Stars shone with colors that hadn't existed moments before, and several Council vessels reported that their instruments were detecting mathematical relationships that their computers insisted were impossible. Admiral Mitchell to all vessels, came the transmission. Devourer probe eliminated. All human ships begin reality stabilization procedures. Council forces maintain defensive positions but avoid attempting to analyze what just occurred. Your computers will thank you. General Krogar's voice cut across the communication channels carrying a mixture of awe and barely controlled terror. Human vessels, explain what we just witnessed. Our tactical analysis systems are reporting that this battle never happened, is currently happening, and will happen in the future simultaneously. Admiral Mitchell replied, "You just witnessed what warfare looks like when conducted by a species that refuses to accept limitations on what reality is allowed to be. Your analysis systems are confused because they are trying to apply linear logic to events that occurred partially outside linear time." Elena could see Council vessels throughout the fleet attempting to process sensor data that violated their fundamental understanding of how battles were supposed to unfold. Several ships were reporting that their AI systems had developed what appeared to be existential anxiety, while others claimed that their weapon systems were spontaneously composing poetry. "This is High Admiral Zagandra of the Aquatic Coalition," came another transmission. "Admiral Mitchell, our scientists are detecting that local space-time has been permanently altered by this engagement. Several fundamental constants appear to have been adjusted. How is such a thing possible?" "Hi, Admiral. Possibility is a concept that humans have never fully accepted. We prefer to work with what we call provisional impossibility. The idea that something is only impossible until we figure out how to do it anyway." The communication channels erupted with multiple Council commanders attempting to demand explanations for phenomena that their science claimed couldn't exist. Elena listened to the chaos with satisfaction. This was exactly the reaction they had hoped for. The Council needed to understand that fighting the Devourers would require them to abandon everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality. "Captain," Commander Chen reported, "we're receiving priority transmissions from deep space monitoring stations throughout Council territory. They're detecting massive reality distortions at 17 different points along the galactic rim. The main Devourer force has begun its approach." Elena nodded grimly. The probe had been a reconnaissance mission designed to gather intelligence about the galaxy's defensive capabilities. Now that it had been destroyed in such an incomprehensible manner, the main Devourer force would arrive prepared for opponents that operated outside normal physical laws. "Signal Admiral Mitchell," she ordered. "Tell her we're ready for Phase 2 operations. It's time to show the Council what a real battle looks like when humanity stops holding back." As the combined fleet prepared to return to their respective staging areas, Elena looked out at the stars that were still shimmering with impossible colors, thinking about the irony of their situation. The Council had spent 3,000 years building a perfect galactic civilization, only to discover that perfection was exactly what made them vulnerable to the Devourers. Humanity had spent those same 3,000 years learning to embrace imperfection. Now those characteristics, which had once made them seem like a threat to galactic order, were the galaxy's only hope for survival. The real war was about to begin, and Elena suspected that before it was over, the Council would understand why their ancestors had been so afraid of humanity. Not because humans were violent or destructive, but because they were something far more dangerous, completely unpredictable. The main Devourer force arrived at the galactic core 3 weeks later, emerging from concept space with such devastating impact that several star systems simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but retroactively erased from the timeline itself. The entities had learned from their probe's encounter with humanity, adapting their approach to account for opponents who refused to follow predictable patterns. They brought with them weapons that attacked the very concept of existence, making their previous arsenals seem quaint by comparison. Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the command center of the UES Prometheus, surrounded by holographic displays showing the largest military engagement in universal history. Over 3 million vessels from across the galaxy had assembled for this final confrontation, representing every species, every world, every civilization that called the Milky Way home. The sight should have been inspiring, but Mitchell knew that numbers meant nothing against an enemy that existed partially outside mathematics itself. Admiral, final fleet positions confirmed, reported Captain Elena Vasquez from her position aboard the Resilience. The human fleet had distributed itself throughout the operational area in patterns that appeared random but were actually based on fractal mathematics and musical composition, creating a deployment that the Devourer's analysis systems couldn't predict or counter. Council forces are requesting tactical coordination, added Commander Chen from the tactical station. General Krogar insists that unified command structure is essential for engaging such a large enemy force. Even after witnessing the destruction of their probe, the Council still believed that conventional military doctrine could be adapted to fight beings that consumed logic itself. They had learned nothing from their previous failures, clinging to strategies that had proven catastrophically ineffective. Tell General Krogar that unified command is exactly what the Devourers expect. They've analyzed the tactical patterns of 17 different galactic civilizations, all of which approached warfare through logical hierarchies and coordinated strategies. We're going to give them something they've never encountered before, a battle conducted through organized chaos. The main display showed the approaching Devourer force in all its terrifying majesty. Hundreds of entities, each one the size of a small moon, moved through space in formations that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Some appeared as crystalline structures that refracted reality itself, while others manifested as living geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. Most disturbing were the entities that existed as pure negation, spaces where reality had been edited out of existence. Dr. Keltar of the Veiltar Scientific Communion transmitted her analysis from the research vessel Synthesis, her crystalline form pulsing with frequencies that indicated barely controlled panic. Admiral Mitchell, our deep space sensors are detecting that the Devourers have modified local space-time throughout this entire region. The fundamental constants that govern physics are fluctuating. Gravity is becoming negotiable. The speed of light is treating itself as a suggestion rather than a law. Confirm, Doctor. They're trying to transform our battlefield into an environment where only they can survive. Standard response would be to retreat to more stable space and establish defensive perimeters. That is indeed our recommendation, came General Krogar's transmission from the Korthak command vessel. We should fall back to the secondary defensive line at the Cygnus sector where our ships can operate under normal physical conditions. General, retreating to normal space is exactly what they want us to do. Once we're operating under predictable physics, they can counter our every move. We're going to do something different. We're going to make this battlefield even more chaotic than they intended. Mitchell activated the Prometheus's most advanced weapon system, a device that human scientists had spent centuries developing specifically for this moment. The reality engine represented the culmination of 3 millennia of desperate innovation, technology that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics within a localized area of space. All human vessels prepare for total reality destabilization. We're about to turn this entire region into a space where anything is possible, including victory. The activation of the reality engine created effects that no previous civilization had ever attempted to generate deliberately. Within seconds, the battlefield became a zone where the laws of physics existed as matters of opinion rather than absolute truth. Gravity began flowing like liquid, time started moving in spirals, and several fundamental forces decided to switch roles without warning. Elena watched from the resilience as her ship adapted to the changing conditions with fluid grace. Human vessels had been designed for exactly this scenario, their hull structures based on mathematical relationships that could maintain coherence regardless of which version of physics happened to be operating at any given moment. Council forces, however, struggled to cope with conditions that their technology had never been designed to handle. Several vessels found themselves existing in multiple locations simultaneously, while others discovered that their weapon systems were firing backwards through time. The Aquatic Coalition's fluid-based ships adapted better than most, but even they had difficulty navigating space where the concept of direction had become optional. "Admiral, the Devourers are attempting to counter our reality modifications," reported Captain Vasquez. "They're trying to impose their own version of physics on the battlefield." Expected. Implement Creativity Protocol 7. Show them what happens when reality becomes a collaborative art project. Human vessels throughout the fleet began executing maneuvers that treated space combat as a form of three-dimensional poetry. They moved in patterns inspired by classical music, attacked using strategies derived from abstract painting, and defended themselves through methods that incorporated elements of interpretive dance and philosophical debate. The effect on the Devourer forces was immediate and catastrophic. Entities that had consumed entire galaxies found themselves unable to process opponents who treated warfare as an expression of artistic creativity. Their analysis systems, designed to counter logical military responses, began developing what could only be described as aesthetic confusion. "Admiral Mitchell," came a transmission from Ambassador Thailand aboard the Altarian research vessel Harmony. "Our Cultural Analysis Department reports that the Devourer entities are exhibiting behavior consistent with what humans would call existential crisis. They appear to be questioning their own fundamental nature." Excellent. That means our strategy is working. All vessels prepare for Phase 2 operations. We're going to teach these things what it means to have an identity crisis. The second phase of the battle began when human ships started broadcasting concentrated concepts directly at the Devourer forces, not words or images, but pure ideas that attacked the entity's core assumptions about existence itself. Questions like, what if consumption is actually creation, and how do you know you exist, were transmitted as weapons, creating logical paradoxes that the Devourer's consciousness couldn't resolve. Elena commanded the resilience through maneuvers that should have been physically impossible, using the destabilized space-time to attack Devourer entities from directions that didn't technically exist. Her crew worked with the kind of focused creativity that only humans had mastered, treating each tactical decision as an opportunity to surprise themselves as much as their enemies. "Captain, we're receiving distress signals from several council vessels," Commander Chen reported. "They're having difficulty maintaining ship integrity in the modified space-time. Several crews are reporting that their thoughts are becoming visible and their emotions are affecting local gravity." "Tell them to embrace it," Elena replied. "Fighting Devourers requires you to accept that impossible things are possible. The more they try to maintain normal thinking patterns, the more vulnerable they become." The turning point of the battle came when the largest Devourer entity, a being that existed as a living absence in reality, attempted to consume the UES Prometheus using a tack that deleted targets from existence itself. Admiral Mitchell responded by having her ship phase into a state where it existed as both matter and antimatter simultaneously, creating a paradox that the Devourer couldn't process. All vessels, the primary entity is entering critical confusion. It's trying to consume something that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Its analysis systems are caught in recursive loops trying to determine whether we're real or not. Elena watched as the massive Devourer entity began flickering between dimensions, its structure becoming unstable as it struggled with opponents who had weaponized Paradox itself. Other human vessels pressed their advantage, attacking with weapons that fired concentrated creativity, defended with shields made of pure stubbornness, and maneuvered using navigation systems based on intuition rather than mathematics. The Council forces, initially struggling with the modified battlefield conditions, began to understand what humanity was attempting. Several commanders started adapting their tactics to incorporate elements of unpredictability, treating their strategic decisions as improvisational exercises rather than calculated responses. "This is General Krogar to all Korthak vessels," came the transmission. "Abandon standard tactical doctrine. Begin operating under what the humans call creative warfare protocols. Make decisions based on what feels right rather than what analysis indicates." The change in Council tactics created a cascading effect throughout the Devourer force. Entities that had successfully consumed 17 previous galaxies found themselves facing opponents who refused to behave according to any comprehensible pattern. Their entire existence was based on understanding and consuming logical civilizations, but they had no framework for dealing with adversaries who treated logic as merely one tool among many. "Admiral, massive reality distortions detected throughout the Devourer formation," reported Dr. Keltar. "Several entities appear to be dissolving as their core programming develops irreconcilable contradictions. They cannot maintain coherent existence when faced with opponents who embody paradox itself." The climax of the battle occurred when Admiral Mitchell coordinated a simultaneous attack by all human vessels using weapons that attacked the Devourer's fundamental concept of purpose. Instead of trying to destroy the entities physically, the humans challenged their basic reason for existing, creating philosophical weapons that ask questions like, "What if your purpose is wrong?" and "Have you considered that destruction might actually be creation in disguise?" The psychological impact on beings that existed as pure consumption was devastating. Devourer entities throughout the battlefield began experiencing what could only be described as metaphysical doubt, their structures becoming unstable as they questioned whether their entire existence had been based on flawed assumptions. "All vessels, the enemy force is entering existential collapse," Mitchell announced. "They're discovering that when you base your entire identity on consuming predictable civilizations, encountering unpredictable opponents creates an identity crisis that affects your ability to maintain coherent existence." Helena watched through the Resilience's sensors as Devourer entities began dissolving throughout the battlefield, not destroyed by conventional weapons but undone by their inability to process opponents who treated reality as a creative medium rather than a fixed set of rules. The beings that had consumed 17 galaxies were being defeated by the simple realization that their victims had never been as helpless as they appeared. "Admiral Mitchell," came a transmission from the largest remaining Devourer entity, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested desperate confusion. "What are you? We have analyzed every possible form of intelligent life. You do not match any pattern in our databases." "We're human," Mitchell replied simply. "We're the species that refuses to accept that anything is impossible until we've tried it ourselves. We're the beings who treat problems as invitations to become something more than we were before, and we're the people who decided that your reign of terror ends here." The entity's response was a sound that registered across multiple dimensions simultaneously, expressing confusion, frustration, and something that might have been fear. "This is not possible. Logical analysis indicates that our victory is inevitable. Mathematical certainty supports our projections. Reality itself confirms our superiority." "That's your problem," Mitchell said. "You believe in certainty. You trust mathematical analysis. You think reality has to follow rules. Humans learned long ago that certainty is just another word for things we haven't figured out how to change yet." The final Devourer entity began to dissolve as it struggled with the concept of opponents who treated impossibility as a temporary inconvenience rather than an absolute barrier. Its structure collapsed not through physical destruction, but through its inability to maintain existence in a universe where beings could weaponize their own unpredictability. In the aftermath, the combined galactic fleet found itself floating in space that had been permanently altered by the encounter. Several star systems had been relocated during the battle, time was flowing in spirals near the galactic core, and the fundamental constants of physics had developed what appeared to be personalities.
"Admiral Mitchell to all vessels," came the transmission.
Devourer forces eliminated. Begin reality stabilization procedures, but don't try too hard. A little chaos keeps life interesting. Elena stood on the bridge of the Resilience, looking out at a universe that had been fundamentally changed by humanity's refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed. Civilizations built on perfect order had proven vulnerable to entities that consumed predictability. Maybe a galaxy that included a healthy dose of chaos would be better equipped to handle whatever challenges the universe could present. "Captain," Commander Chen reported, "we're receiving communications from council worlds throughout the galaxy. They want to know what happens now. How do we rebuild galactic civilization after everything that's occurred?" Elena smiled, thinking about the question that would define the next phase of galactic history. How do you build a society that includes beings who have learned to weaponize impossibility itself? "Tell them," she said, "that we're about to find out what happens when humans help design galactic civilization instead of being excluded from it, and suggest they hold on tight because it's going to be an interesting ride." The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. For the first time in 3,000 years, humanity was home, and they had brought with them hard-won knowledge that the universe was far more flexible than anyone had previously imagined. Everyone dismissed humans as legends until their fleet entered the fray. Best HFY Stories. HFY Sci-Fi Story.